Klaus Hahn, a pilot of the notorious Sonderkommando LB, is on a deadly mission to ram and destroy a B-17 bomber. This is his first combat flight, but disaster strikes immediately as his squadron is scattered and events take a turn for the worse. Suddenly, a squadron of P-51 Mustangs appears, head-on. The enemy planes streak by, then wheel around to aggressively pursue Hahn's lone aircraft. They attack from the rear, unleashing a storm of bullets. Hahn desperately tries to evade as the Mustangs close in. The Bf-109s used in this operation were expendable, so the planes given to Sonderkommando LB were far from perfect, equipped with barely any ammunition. Hahn's aircraft was noticeably slow, for reasons unknown. His only choice was a desperate attempt to evade the relentless Americans on his tail. Outmatched and poorly trained, both Hahn and his plane were riddled with enemy fire. The enemy machine guns tore his aircraft apart piece by piece. Hahn tried everything to shake them off, but it was futile. Suddenly, a burst of fire ripped through the cockpit, hitting his arm just below the shoulder. He barely registered the impact, focused as he was on maneuvering. It was then he realized the throttle wasn't responding, and then that his entire arm was immobile. He had to bail out. Hahn flipped his Bf-109 and prepared to jump. Upside down, he dove away, trying to bail out safely, plummeting from the sky. Hahn glanced down, spotting his useless arm against the canopy. Suddenly, a break in the clouds revealed a terrifying sight. Directly below, a formation of B-17s, the very bombers he loathed. Fueled by rage, he seized the controls once more, diving towards the enemy formation. He locked his sights on a B-17 in the middle. His life flashed before his eyes, remembering the path that led him here. At just 17, he had witnessed endless waves of bombers unleashing tons of explosives on his city.
The aftermath of the bombings, the dead women, children, and elderly ignited something within me. I knew I had to act.
That action was enlisting in Sonderkommando LB. Upon joining, he was told, this unit's mission is to destroy Allied 4-engine bombers by ramming them without firing a single shot. The goal was to inflict such heavy losses that the Allies would be forced to halt their bomber offensive, giving German industry the time needed to produce a fleet of advanced Men 262 jet fighters. Hahn was instructed to attack with a plan to escape, not to sacrifice himself. Klaus took what he believed to be his final breath. His Bf-109 accelerated toward its target. He slammed into the tail, sending the tail gunner flying into the waist gunner's section. The B-17 shuddered violently from the impact. Inside the cockpit, Wentz radioed his crew.
What was that? Is everyone all right?
We're okay, but we've been hit by a fighter.
Damage report.
There's a huge hole in the tail and the turret's gone. How are we supposed to land this thing?
Even with severe damage, such as losing control surfaces or landing gear, pilots can use engine thrust to steer and stabilize their aircraft. In cases of damaged landing gear, a belly landing can be executed by using engine power to manage descent and glide the aircraft to safety.
The vertical stabilizer is completely torn up. We're losing parts, Captain.
Understood.
Wentz knew he had to regain control of his B-17 quickly to avoid colliding with the other B-17s in the formation. But when he tried to use the controls, he found they were unresponsive. The elevator and rudder were useless, only engine power remained.
How are we still in the air?
Below, Klaus Hahn regained consciousness in freefall. He snapped awake, with no memory of exiting his plane. Looking down, he realized he was extremely high and reminded himself to wait until he was at a safe altitude before deploying his parachute.
I thought I did it. Against all odds, I'm alive. I rammed a bomber. I was in freefall until I could breathe more easily. I pulled the ripcord at about 3,000 feet.
The parachute opened, and the force of the deceleration caused him to briefly lose consciousness. Back in the B-17, Wentz fought desperately to keep the aircraft airborne. With no rudder or elevator, maneuverability was almost impossible, but he refused to surrender.
We're barely holding it together. I can't maintain formation. We're turning back. Prepare to bail out.
He knew that a collision with another plane in the formation was imminent if he wasn't careful. Only one means of control remained: the throttles. By varying the engine power on each wing, he managed to make the damaged plane turn slightly left and right.
Red leader, this is Red 4. We've taken heavy damage and are leaving the formation. Do you copy?
It's Roger that, Red 4. Take care. Red leader out.
Wentz's aircraft was badly hit, forcing them to break away from the formation. He focused on the throttles while his co-pilot scanned the sky.
Wentz, watch out. Pull up.
I can't. The elevator's gone.
The B-17 wobbled, barely controllable. With no pitch control, speed was their only way to manage altitude. Struggling through wide, clumsy turns, they aimed for Allied territory, desperately searching for a landing site.
See anything? Over there. An airfield.
Is it one of ours? I have no idea.
They had no other choice. The plane shuddered violently as they approached the short runway.
Altitude 300, 250.
Engine set to 2100.
Landing gear down?
Not yet now.
The landing gear deployed at the last possible moment. The aircraft slammed onto the runway, rolling to a stop. They were alive, but were they now prisoners? As they took in their surroundings, an American infantryman appeared.
You're not supposed to land here.
I didn't have a choice. Look at the tail of the plane.
They had landed near the front lines, where American troops were preparing to withdraw. Then, they spotted something incredible, an abandoned B-17.
Maybe we can take that plane over there?
Hey, it's not mine. You can have it.
Examining it closely, they discovered it belonged to KG-200, a German special operations unit. But it hadn't yet been repainted with enemy markings. The fuel tanks were full. After thorough checks, Wentz started the engines, testing the controls. Everything seemed functional. They had one shot at flying home.
Ready to head out?
Wait a minute. Our guys are grabbing something they'll bet.
Wentz glanced out the window and saw the gunner approaching with a piece of the Bf-109's wing.
A souvenir.
With that, the captured B-17 sprung to life, its engines roaring as it ascended into the sky. They climbed as quickly as possible and set course for England. The flight was perilous, with no escort, no formation, and no ammunition. That is, until they reached the safety of Allied airspace.
What in the world is that?
Finally, and fortunately, they reached the English coast without being spotted by the enemy. For the second time that day, they prepared to land a B-17, but this time, one with fully functioning controls. Wentz executed a flawless landing, and the sounds of his crew celebrating filled the intercom.
And I seem to recall giving you a brand new plane.
Well, that one's currently sitting in Germany somewhere.
Klaus Hahn was rescued from the German countryside and taken to a hospital in Munster, where his arm was amputated. He survived.
I can't explain why I still rammed. Maybe it was desperation. I wouldn't call it courage.
Sonderkommando Elba's desperate attacks were futile. Germany surrendered just a month later. With only 150 pilots, they had no real chance of stopping the Allied bombers. The operation was so insignificant that Allied High Command didn't even realize they had faced a coordinated ramming attack until years later. After the mission, Wentz's crew was grounded. It had been their last. They all returned home safely, and Wentz soon married his sweetheart. For decades, Wentz never knew the ramming had been intentional. It wasn't until 2003, when an author reached out to interview him, that he learned the truth. He later contacted the LB veterans, who informed Klaus Hahn that the crew had survived. Hahn, overwhelmed with emotion, broke down in tears, relieved that he hadn't taken American lives that day.
Did you hear about that ball turret gunner? He fell out of the plane without a parachute.
Yeah, he's even luckier than us.
War is full of untold stories, acts of desperation, survival, and fate. Klaus Hahn and Bud Wentz walked away from battle, but their stories remain connected for decades. What other hidden missions and forgotten heroes shaped history? Subscribe to FLYTOP and stay with us. There's always another story waiting to be uncovered.